Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the fourth session of Limitless 2022 For Children, for Change, for Life, World Vision's Asia Summit for Corporate Good. This session is entitled Climate Change and the Bottom Line. How can corporations reverse the trend? Climate change and disaster threaten the long-term sustainability of development in Asia. While we've always been hearing that climate change is real, what steps have we taken to mitigate it? Join us and learn from our invited regional and global experts on how corporations and civil society organizations adapt and enable reversal in climate change trends. Please turn your attention to the screen as you see this video. It is my honor to introduce the panelists for this particular session. We are glad to have Pierre Laurinet, Chairman of Laurinet Foundation. Pierre's personal philanthropic journey is centered on expanding the work of his family foundation. Laurinet Foundation's mission is to support pioneering, impactful, and sustainable initiatives promoting education, employment, and access to clean water and energy for vulnerable communities in Mongolia and Southeast Asia. Thank you, Pierre, for accepting our invitation. Please join me in welcoming Tony Rinaldo, Principal Climate Action Advisor for World Vision. Tony serves as Principal Climate Action Advisor for World Vision. He promotes forestry and agroforestry initiatives globally within the World Vision Partnership and beyond. For his 18 years service to humanity and the environment, the government of Niger awarded him its highest honor for an expatriate, the Order of Agriculture with Merit. He is widely recognized for his influential contribution to heighten international awareness on the impact and efficacy and uptake of simple, low-cost, scalable methods of reforestation known as FMNR. Among major awards, Tony and FMNR have recently received 2018's Right Livelihood Award for demonstrating on a large scale how dry lands can be greened at minimal cost, improving the livelihoods of millions of people, and the World Future Council Agroecology Award. In 2019, Tony was appointed as the member of the Order of Australia. We also like to welcome Dr. Vincent Cheng, Arup Fellow, Director of Climate and Sustainability. Dr. Vincent is a Fellow and Director of Climate and Sustainability Services at Arup in East Asia. He leads a group of design engineers and specialists working on some of the most sustainable projects across the region and advising clients on their transition to zero carbon. His lifelong dedication in sustainability has earned him the Sustainability Leader of the Year in Hong Kong Sustainability Award 2018-19. And I'm so glad to invite Nomu Dari, World Vision's youth advocate from Mongolia. Nomu has a strong opinion on children's rights. She's a resident of Ulaanbaatar, Mongolia, the world's coolest capital and one of its most polluted, as she says. Nomu Dari is a member of consisting of 25 to 30 students who meet regularly to debate and discuss issues related to environmental health, gender issues, and violence against children. This group opens the space for students to share their ideas on many topics that they consider relevant, such as sharing ideas on how to be a responsible citizen and how they can develop and improve the school environment where they study. She is the vice president of her school student council and the president of Fridays for Future Mongolia. She is also young leader of World Vision since 2019 and a member of our Child Rights Connect since 2020. In this critical session, we are honored to have Sarah Berup leading a relevant, timely, and insightful conversation. Sarah is the Chief Operations Officer for World Vision International and the Asia Pacific region. She is a global humanitarian and developmental leader with deep expertise in protecting the most vulnerable and responding to complex, protracted crises. Sarah is a former diplomat and humanitarian advisor for the Australian government's Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. She has developed deep domain expertise in protection and inclusion, specifically responses to gender-based violence, child protection, and disability inclusion. Thank you all for joining in this panel discussion, and over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Rahul, and good morning, afternoon, and evening to you all. Thanks for joining us today. It's certainly a privilege to moderate this session. We'll be discussing a really critical and timely issue, climate action. And importantly, it'll be an opportunity to listen and learn at how businesses are acting and responding, helping to mitigate the negative impacts of climate change. Firstly, here in my home, Melbourne, Australia, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri people, the traditional custodians of this land, and I pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. But without further ado, it's time to hear from our esteemed panel composed of advocates for the environment and climate action, as well as representatives from the mining and energy industries. To the broader audience, I invite your questions and comments in the chat. Please don't hesitate. This is such a great opportunity to connect and learn more. I'm going to start with Nomu. Let's begin, Nomu, by tackling the effects of climate change on children and young people, which is a central focus of World Vision's work. As a mother of teenage children, this is certainly a hot topic at our dinner table. We're so fortunate today to hear from Nomu as one of our very own passionate World Vision youth advocates. As UNICEF states, nearly 9 out of 10 children who fall ill due to climate change are aged 5 or younger. By 2040, an estimated 25 million more children will be malnourished due to the impact of climate change, and a further 600 million will live in areas with extremely limited water resources. Nomu, as a youth advocate, what are some of your biggest fears if we neglect to respond effectively to climate change?
As a child advocate, hello everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm Nomu, and English is my second language. So if I stutter or make mistakes, please walk past by it. And so to answer for it, as a child advocate, my biggest fear is that if we ignore or neglect to respond to climate change, is that all we have done will go into vain. So I started advocating internationally for when I was 14 years old, and now I'm 17. It's been quite the journey. I have attended meetings very early in the mornings to late at nights. I have planned a project where we clean around the schools, or where we start doing other more projects that could help. This is something that I've done in the past like 3 to 4 years, and not just me, but other child advocates have done what they can do best too. Now, we don't have to do anything. As a child myself, I don't have the responsibility, or I don't need to do anything at all to, for climate change, but I am doing it. And I did it because I wanted to, because I had to. Everyone in our own ways who are advocating for climate change have our best to do best, like, to not make this world bad. And if we neglect or ignore these things that we've been doing for past few years, then my biggest fear is that all we have done will go into vain. I'm sorry if my answer was too long.
No, that was fantastic, Nomu. And let me follow up a little bit with you, because I think what's so important for us today is to think about how we listen and partner with children and youth. You are the next generation who has to hold a very heavy burden, as my own children remind me. And we know the threats are really great facing your generation. So, did you want to expand just on how we go about listening and partnering with young people on this journey?
Yes. So there's a common mistake that happens in Mongolia, is that adults, whenever we try to like warn about stuff or try to come up with solutions, they silence us. They act like they hear it, like, oh, is that so? Okay, now go ahead and sit down, or stuff like that. So instead of doing that, actually listen to our solution. And if our solution doesn't make sense, or if it's something that you've already done, remind us and tell us about it so that we can come up with something new, or so that we can have more information on what to do. A lot of adults, they try to hide things from us, like hide informations, because they think we won't understand, or they think that we're not mature enough to get involved in it. It's not about being mature or, trying to understand it, because anyone can understand that climate change is a risk and we need to take action. Everyone knows about it. Even my 5-year-old cousin knows about it. So listen to us, and if we said something wrong, correct us in the right way, and then, guide us so that we can help too, because we want to help.
Beautifully said, Nomu. Couldn't have said it any better. And we hear that call to listen, not to hide the facts and the realities, and to work with you on solutions. I know we know as an organisation, World Vision, that a great deal of innovation comes from young people and children themselves. So thank you. I'll move on to my next question. I think many of you have heard the quote from Charles Zareb of Trident Estates, who says sustainability is not a choice, but a necessity. And I think this certainly translates into the climate action sector. It's going to be important for us all to listen and learn from the solutions and the opportunities that organisations and businesses have sought when it comes to climate action. Pierre, I'd like to start with you. In your view, how should organisations respond? And I really welcome your insights on adapting sustainability strategies, specific measures or initiatives that can actually be replicated and scaled up. Thank you, Pierre.
Thank you, Sarah, and hello, everyone. Well, I think there's different aspects to how businesses can what they can do effectively. For me, there's three level of analysis on this. One is there's a first level where there's simply a compliance issue. I mean, there are regulations that are increasingly putting obligations on organizations to meet climate change goals or challenges, and that's, I would say, that the basic level of engagement. Beyond that, there's also, I think, as Nomi was saying, increasing societal and reputational pressures that are to take into account, coming from entire society, from adults to children, from everywhere. We all have dinner conversations with our kids. I also have teenage kids. And obviously here, it's for corporate, it's about, if they do not address climate change concerns head on and genuinely, they will find it harder to recruit new people, to raise funding, and to find partners for businesses. So it will affect their license to operate and fundamentally impair their survival in the long term if they don't address it. And that's why a lot of corporates more and more actually are taking action with regards to greenhouse gas emissions, measuring their scope 1, 2, and 3, setting targets, and then reporting transparently on progress and results on those targets. I think the final point, I think, which is more positive, because if I look at compliance and societal pressure, those are sort of negative push factors for corporates, if you could say that. I think there's also a lot of businesses can look to embrace the opportunities generated by the green economy, because there are a lot of ways that you can actually develop new opportunities that are both good for business, but also good for the environment and helping in the transition that we want to achieve. And these comes in I think, two main ways. One is around improving energy efficiency and sustainability of their existing operations to make their business more resilient and save costs. And we see, particularly in today, unfortunately, we've had a reminder that geopolitics crises do happen and that they do have an impact on energy security and energy prices. And so, trying to make your business more resilient to that is a positive. The second way is simply by going into new opportunities in the green economy. And some of the businesses, I mean, yes, I obviously, a lot of my work is with the family foundation, but I also sit on boards of a number of corporates and government development agencies. And there I see organizations looking into investing obviously in renewable energy development and production, investing in new technologies such as technologies around hydrogen and ammonia for long-haul transport of trucks or ships, which are particularly hard industries to move from the current environment to a more sustainable, climate-friendly approach. So those are other ways the corporates. I think that maybe a final element I'd like to add is, and where I think philanthropy meets the corporate world is around advocacy. And again, some of the corporates I'm involved with are also looking to advocate, to remove effectively barriers and accelerate the energy transition. So, one of the examples is for carbon tax around shipping. I think, when you look at some of the areas, the various areas that are effectively impacting the climate, there are some that are easier to transition than others. And if you look at shipping, construction, flying, those are particularly hard. We don't today have alternatives for fossil fuels. And so putting in the right, sort of framework and creating an element that will help or will push effectively corporates and generate funds that can be reinvested in research and development in new technologies, I think is essential. And I think that's where, again, corporate can play a role there as well. And that's where I think also philanthropy probably has more to play in that framework, because it's more risky. There's no immediate return to advocacy, but it is something that is imminently important in removing barriers to the transition.
Thank you, Pierre. That's so insightful, highlighting the really critical role of businesses. I really valued what you said about particularly the advocacy element that's sometimes neglected in the conversation, and appreciate that you have a really unique perspective from so many diverse roles. We'll come back to you on a later question, but let me pose the same question to Vincent next. Vincent, how do you think organisations and businesses can respond to climate change?
Thanks, Sarah. And then first of all, thanks, well wishes to having me here. I mean, it's really my great honor, to share my experience and also some of experience of my company that working on these areas. Well, indeed, if you look at the past few years, and in particular since that Paris agreements, I would say the business world actually changed a lot, and it's actually probably the first time that the governments, the business sector, and the industry actually are aligned on one of this, I would say, most important agenda in humanities, till now. So I think Pierre actually have tell us the kind of context, what's the drivers, main drivers that are making business align on this direction. What I'd like to add on that is actually that we need to work together. We know that. I mean, combating climate change is not a right thing to do. It's a good thing to do, for business also. And that thing certainly there's a lot things that could be done within in organizations, and of course also collectively across the different sectors. And first, I think it's very important that we need to change our carbon lock-in economy. That's I think is very important, and the practice. We have been using this carbon-driven kind of economy mode for industrial revolutions. So we have been using this very successfully, driving our economy development. So then that has to be changed. I think all organizations have to think, pause and then think ahead what actually is important, not only to our business, and more important to the humanities and for next generations. That if we want to sustain another and forever, that what are the important things. So I think at certain junctures, we need to walk away from something. We our organization make I would say quite bold commitments last year, is that we decide to walk away from fossil fuel completely. So starting from last year, is that we will not do any projects that's be related, an energy project related to fossil fuels. So that's very important. If all big organizations make this kind of commitments, that the world will change, and business world I'm talking about will change quite rapidly on that. So secondly, that we have to we're actually helping our client, of course, to develop the decarbonization roadmap. I mean, we actually what's been done, that we have already pumping a lot, or too much maybe, kind of CO2 in the atmosphere. We have to start to think about how we can wind down this kind of emission, and after that we have to think about how we can capture that, so that that can bring down to a level that do not exceed our the carrying capacity of the group. So I think all organizations are need to make another commitments, which is their net zero commitments. Here in our we actually give a deadline of 2030s. By 2030s, that we will be net zeros in our operations, including helping our client, of course, and what Pierre mentioned, that scope 3 kind of emissions. That I think is something that we have to work together. I mean, lastly, I think also very important is that we need to act, right? We need to suggest or discuss what sort of actions that we could, could be starting from small things, right? Within organizations, we set our teams to think about we have the plan, we have the roadmaps, what's next, and what's the actions, and then we think about our business, and we think about our operations. And when we think about operation, the major kind of I would say one of the key emission is in our operation is the air travel. So we actually set up a kind of I would say regulations on within the firm, and how we could control, not completely, stop this kind of air travels. And secondly, we also need to engage our own people, right? At the end, if over 16,000 of our employees do not embark on this exercise, that kind of impacts won't be that impactful enough. So we need to have a lot of activities to align, to engage them to help us to decarbonize. Things could be as simple as encouraging them to use public transportations for commuting, and that by itself actually alone could help a lot in reducing the carbons from our operation. And if we can, of course, lead by example, influence other that to do the same thing. So something. What I'm trying to say is the business world and also the corporate operation level, and that is changing, and it's I think it's moving in quite encouraging and positive directions that we like to see. Sarah.
Thank you, Vincent, for such a wise and really a courageous example of where a group is making really significant change. I think what you've also highlighted is the importance of a paradigm shift. Really bringing people along that journey, everything from starting small. Can we take public transportation? Are we recycling? Are we moving away from paper-based to digital-based? There's a lot of good examples, but I'm really impressed by just how far your organisation has taken things, and really the tough questions. What kind of sacrifices do we need to make? What does it mean to walk away from fossil fuels? I mean, huge questions. So really appreciate such a wise response. I'll also come back to you on the next question. But before I do so, Tony, I'd like to pass this over to you. I mean, from your perspective, how do you think businesses and organisations can respond to the impacts of climate change?
Thank you, Sarah, and hello, everybody. And perhaps my response is a little bit different tact. Of course, there's all the usual suspects: alternative energy sources, efficiency, look at your packaging and your supply line. But in my work experience in restoring degraded lands, initially I took this technical and financial approach. And of course, it's a part of what we need to do in tackling climate change. But I realized that's not where the primary battle lay. And if it was people's beliefs about the environment and their practices, their destructive practices destroying the trees, that's actually the first place to tackle. And so it's, in my mind, it's a human mindset issue. And the first thing to do is for people to accept the reality of, in their case, land degradation, accept their portion of the responsibility for that damage, and then take action. And if I translate that back to climate change, we first have to believe that we've got an issue here. And I'm not convinced that everybody is thinking this is a problem. Secondly, we have to accept our role, our contribution towards this problem, and then take action. And people who call me funny names, the forest maker, actually 95% of my time is spent regreening mindscapes. And we need to do the same thing with climate. We've got an existential threat here, and people are still partying.
Yes, well said, Tony. I often refer to your statement around regreening mindsets towards regreening landscapes. I think it's an excellent way to put it, and an important reminder that it's not time to party, it's time to get serious. And I think today is really about that. It's about collectively acting in each one of our roles, in each one of our spheres of influence. I'm going to move on to the next question, starting with Vincent. Vincent, how critical do you think partnerships and coordinated efforts are in bringing climate action and addressing the impacts of climate change?
Well, I think certainly that we need to complete this exercise in a concerted way. We need kind of collective, I would say, efforts from everyone. If you look from perspective of business or our industrial practices, or how we actually coordinate ourselves within our society, that I think it's not a kind of job that can be completed or finished by one or organization or one individual. So we have to work collectively. Well, in particular, what Pierre mentioned, I mean that in kind of emissions for corporations, for business, that there's a three scope mainly. That on scope 3 actually related to the kind of partners that all business work with their partners on completing their job. So I think partnership is very important that if you want to influence others. I mean, say for example that I think now globalization is becoming kind of a norm for operations. So many companies actually that they need to source, they need to get the kind of their kind of supply from global supply chains. So I think first thing that I mean these companies probably can help to build a kind of a green practice on this global sourcing. I mean, in particular, they have the kind of influence, right? They could set, I think more importantly, the kind of sustainability requirements for all their kind of products that they procure worldwide, and that actually can create a kind of need and also demand in the industry to identify what's I mean, Europe, we have the taxonomy. What is the right things to do in the industry, and that I think is something hasn't been resolved totally yet. But I think with this kind of I would say guideline or requirement set by the buyer, certainly the producer or provider will do something to help to make the entire supply chain cleaner and more sustainable. And secondly, it's also important that we need to track the performance, right? I mean, in particular, I mean, all I would say list company or other big corporations, they need to disclose their ESG performance. So that actually provide another opportunities for this big mega company to work more effectively or collaborate with their partners. So they need to track the performance of their working partners, and I think with those informations and you collate, then they could comfortably to disclose their own kind of performance. I think that is very important. And that I think the ESG investment or ESG reporting things actually are evolving and developing fast, and I think that can be a very effective mechanism to help, to guide, to direct the overall practice of the business and also the industrial practices and the hopefully the financial the Wall Street people can listen to that and then help from their end also to give the pressure on that. But finally, I think it's also important that we need to create the business needs to be incentivized. I mean, there's a different, I would say, mechanism or means that we can get kind of incentive. Of course, with this kind of good practice being in place, I mean, these company they should work. They should encourage their partners to work more with more, I would say, repeated work, and more importantly, that if possible, they could provide the kind of financial assistance to help them to build their capacity. I mean, bear in mind, in many, I would say, manufacturing base or manufacturing company in Southeast Asia or even in East Asia, then they're not that developed. They don't have the knowledge, they don't have the capacity, they don't have the resources to develop this kind of system. So with help of, say, the MNC, that probably can expedite the whole process and make this kind of transformations faster and quicker. And hopefully with, the kind of regional integrations, in these areas on this region that can provide more, even better, quicker kind of impetus to help to guide everybody into working in the right decision or directions.
Vincent, they are excellent points. Thank you. I mean, it's you've highlighted the importance of a number of things, including industry standards, being able to track performance, business incentives, so important, and also really support to effectively transform. I thought it was interesting yesterday, there was a couple of conversations where the parallel importance of ESGs and SDGs was raised. Very interesting that continued to come up again and again. I'm going to direct the same question to Tony. Tony, how critical do you think partnerships and coordinated efforts are in terms of combating climate change?
Thank you. Of course, every individual, every company has a responsibility and can do much, but it has limits. And the problem and the impact of climate change are at such a scale and have such an urgency that I don't think any single government or organization or individual can effectively tackle it alone. But when we've got a shared goal, and agreed on strategy, allocated roles and responsibilities, it will have a much, much greater impact. And I certainly see this in my work in land restoration. I work primarily with communities, and they can go so far. They can work on their own land, they can have an impact. But I've noticed through World Vision, it gives me much greater reach. I can advocate for favorable and enabling policies. I can work with education institutes to bring up the next generation with a better way of managing environment and climate, research institutes that can guide the way, and other non-government organizations. And when you bring all those actors together, it's powerful and things can move quickly and at scale.
Wow, the power of collective action. And I think that's coming up quite a lot today. Thank you. Very important reminder. Pierre, I'd love you to answer that one as well. I know we didn't initially put your name down there, but if you would please add in just in terms of the importance, the critical nature of partnerships and coordinated efforts.
Sure. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
No, I think I can only agree with Tony and Vincent on the importance of partnership. I think in order to scale and to tackle the problem, you need everybody to join in. But I think for me, that there's one aspect that I find particularly critical. Some of the organizations I'm with work across the world, both in developed economies as well as in developing economies in Africa and in South America and Asia. And often what I find is, we need to make sure that this transition doesn't further disadvantage vulnerable population when it comes to also economic developments, because what you find is, and unsurprisingly effectively, that the countries and the people with the least responsibility for historical emissions are also the ones which are potentially first most impacted by climate change in terms of daily lives and daily impact. But also are in the greatest need of economic developments today relative to, let's say, Western societies. And so we need to find ways, and that's only through cooperation at, multi-government level, corporate, everybody, to, ensure that, there is a just transition for across the globe. And I think those that are more responsible should do more and support, smoothing out the difficulties that will come with transiting through this phase. The other aspect, even at country level, you'll find that because we're transiting out of certain industries or certain, let's say coal mining, disappearing, there's a lot of there are a lot of people that still depend, miners, etc., on coal mines, etc. So how do you ensure that they're not left behind by this as well? So, and it probably goes to, reclamation or rejuvenation of areas of, how do you create new economic sources or revenue sources for these communities to ensure that they can take part into the transition. So for me, it's really finding and all of these can only be done if it's coordinated at scale with many different stakeholders. So I think it's essential that we cooperate on this.
Thank you, Pierre. That's absolutely critical. I loved the way you described it as a just transition.
Mm-hmm.
That certainly speaks to my heart, having been focused on deep needs and vulnerabilities across my career. And I think what we've seen with the global pandemic, is also an exacerbation of vulnerabilities and social inequalities. And so adding the realities of climate change, the global pandemic, and also, of course, conflict in parts of the region. These are huge issues to consider, and really important that we're not leaving people behind. We're not creating greater divides and therefore not meeting needs well. So thank you, such important points. We'll keep moving. I know we haven't got a lot of time left, but I really want to ask this question. Let me start with Tony. I'm going to put him on the spot here. I'm a little scared about what you're going to say, Tony. I want to ask you about the greatest risks and implications if we fail to effectively step up climate adaptation measures.
Thank you, Sarah. The scary thing is, we don't actually need a crystal ball. And I was just reading this morning the damage bill from the recent floods in Queensland, state of Australia, is the second highest damage bill in our history, $5 billion. And so my first point is, we in wealthier countries are not immune to this. It's taking lives, but it's wiping out businesses, destroying infrastructure. It's happening in developing countries. In my work, I see it all the time. Increased frequency and severity of drought, lower crop yields, loss of livestock, damage from severe storms, wiping out family enterprises and other enterprises as well. What's the upshot of that? Increased hunger, competition for scarce resources, in too many cases, conflict, and sometimes the growth of extremism, migration. So in short, locally where I work, I'm seeing collapse of society. And then there's the potential destabilization of the countries these people migrate to. They have no option. It's unlivable where they live. Let's go to these seemingly better places. So simply put, Sarah, we can't afford to ignore it. We have to take action.
Very sobering indeed. I expected that, but it's hard to hear. But one of the very important elements of this conversation is being real about the hard realities. You're right, we don't even need a crystal ball to know how important it is that we all respond. Every individual, every business, organisation, community, you name it. Vincent, did you want to follow up on that question? Is there anything you'd like to add in terms of the greatest risks and implications if we don't act effectively?
Well, I can't agree more with what Tony just said. I think, in fact, these climate change are affecting not only human beings, but also our strength infrastructure. I you probably know that the recent heat wave happening happening in Europe caused a lot of disruptions on transportation system, because that's been built probably for centuries, in particularly in UK. So I think that's why our firm actually looked in this very seriously, and that of course as an engineering consultant firm, we need to look into it from the facts. Right? We need data. So that's why that we actually have set up a dedicated climate team to look into the science. What is the science, and what are the possible solutions that we can actually handle this problem if we have to face it? Meaning that we have to build the kind of capacities or resilience to deal with this. So that's why we've done a lot of modeling. That if you may, can you put on my slide if possible? That can be easier to elaborate my points on that. And if you look at this line, all the scenario actually considered by IPCC are not looking very promising, and we know that throughout the end of the century, we will have adverse 4 or 5 degrees rise as compared pre-industrializations temperatures. This is significant. I mean, average global temperature raised by 4 degrees is something that's not been happened any before ever since the existence of this beautiful world planets. So we have to look into this. What sort of risks, and in particular when we say build resilience, to what extent of resilience we need to build up to, and that's something the team here is working on. We know that for sure that by end of 2030s that we will have temperatures higher than 1.5 degrees. So after that, so what will be the consequence? That if I may, to have again at the PowerPoint, actually the next slide of my PowerPoint actually to tell you that what's a consequence that you have. I mean, effectively, can I have my slide on again? If not, actually I can talk through. I mean, basically this slide actually, that's worst things that we certainly don't like to see, and that and particularly in this region, we got East Asia or Southeast Asia, that we will face these 3, I would say, key climate risks, and that actually can be translated into kind of hazards of our infrastructure and also our city, or our society in terms of normal operations. So first, it will be we will have a more and more intensive typhoon or hurricanes happening in this region, and that country like the Philippines and other Southeast Asian are highly susceptible to this kind of super typhoon. That I think is something we have to work together. How collectively? I mean, we know that it's coming, but how? I mean, that with our collective efforts, Johnny, we can help to build resilience for this developing country. I think it's something that we have to think serious about. And of course, secondly, that on that sea level rise, that will affect everyone. It's not only about low-lying country, but I mean globally. If the projections, prediction by IPCC is correct, that we will, on average, by the end of this century, average rise by 0.5 meters, which is significant. Right? You can imagine many low-level kind of cities that they will be flooded completely, by this kind of zero level rise year-round, all the time. So, and if you consider that the kind of extreme worst scenario, whereby we have this typhoon and other storm surge coming in, this kind of a zero rise will even more kind of severe, could be up to 2 meters. That I think is something that we are unprepared, totally unprepared. Nobody actually at this juncture actually prepare for this kind of extreme conditions. I mean, likewise, a heat wave. We know that in summer it's going to be very hot, but we don't know it could be that hot. That's actually affecting not only our health and well-being, but also our infrastructure. Just imagine if the next heat wave will bring temperature rise up to 45 degrees in these regions. All the infrastructure probably will be stopped at different levels. So I think these, if you add up together, that it could become multiple hazards that can hit and any of this country in these regions. So I think that is something that certainly we have not prepared, and even from business or I would say from our professional practices perspective, we are still not prepared there yet. So we have to to help firstly the government to think about the future kind of well-being of us and develop the kind of right policy to align everybody together to find solutions so that we can build the kind of resilience to cater for this kind of extreme weathers.
Vincent, they were excellent reminders of the importance of the science, building an evidence base, really knowing the facts and going forward, having a trajectory, the scenarios and whatnot. I was in India recently during the heat wave of 48 degrees. Oh my word, it's, to imagine local communities living in that reality, being able to somehow work and manage and provide for their families. And that's just one example of the extraordinary impacts of climate change and just how real it certainly is. Thank you. Can I please invite the broader audience? We've only got a few more minutes left, so please, your chance is now. If you've got a burning question, make sure you get it into the chat. I've got a couple more, so we'll just keep flowing. It's a fantastic conversation. It's sobering, but it's important, and that's why we're all here. I want to ask a question to Pierre. Pierre, I think many of us have heard that sort of quite natural concern in many ways around businesses responding to climate change and the concern that that comes at the expense of profitability. So I wanted to ask you about climate action strategies and how we sort of look beyond profit, and how we do that perhaps without necessarily affecting the bottom line.
Thank you, Sarah. Sure. I think in an earlier question, I mentioned briefly that I think there are business opportunities within the green economy, and companies can, by reinventing their business or parts of their business as they transition away from old practices to new ones, generate profits while doing good. So I think that there's an element of that. But if I take a little step back and talk about energy, energy is at the core of everything. Even when we talk about education, for example, if you don't get access to electric light or some sort of lighting in the evening, it affects your educational outcome. So, energy for transportation, for light, for all kind of issues, for all the machinery, is essential. And if you look at energy, you have three dimensions to consider. One is it available? Have you got security of access? The price, is it affordable to the majority? And then is it sustainable? Is it actually generated in a way that doesn't destroy the environment we live in? I don't think we can ignore any of these dimensions when we're dealing, with an orderly and just transition. And I think Tony mentioned it, but I think we need to understand that unfortunately, our entire productive system, our entire economy globally is based today on fossil fuel. And so it will take trillions of investment across the world, across countries over the next decades to really move us from this addiction to fossil fuel to something more sustainable that preserves our environment. And so to do this, I think we talked about partnership. We need everybody to pull in, and I think the notion that government and philanthropy are going to do this maybe against corporates because they're the bad actors in this space, I think is probably wrong. I think that the profit motive is quite powerful. So I think having government develop a framework of carrots and sticks measures that effectively will drive the private sector to make the investment and transformation that is needed, I think is essential. So I think for me, and profit is only defined by the regulatory environment you live in. If you create a tax on something and then provide subsidies for something else, you will over time drive investment in a certain area, and it doesn't have to affect profit per se. And actually, the fact that the investment that we're doing generate profit will ensure that you can continue making the investments required, because it's not a 1 or 2 year or 3 year effort. It's decades of significant investment in infrastructure, in changing our sources of energy that we need to do. And for that, we need to really leverage everyone and the entire ecosystem. So that's basically what I would say.
Thank you. Gosh, another very important reminder that it's going to take everyone's collective action on this. And I really appreciated your emphasis on incentives for investment. you know, and working together on this. I don't think there's any such thing as a bad sort of sector in the process of making change in climate action. Ultimately, it will be good for all of us, and it takes every small step, every big step over the long term. Nomu, I have a question for you. We're coming to a close quite soon. So I wanted to come back to you. Nomu, you'll see there's a couple of comments in the chat. Thanks to Neville and Angelica and others. There's absolutely no doubt that young people and children are so central to an effective conversation on climate action. And I wondered, after listening to this panel discussion, whether you had any final thoughts or comments.
So, before this panel discussion and before everything began, I first thought that adults weren't doing anything. Like, no one is acting or no one is trying to make change. That's what I first thought. And then after attending meetings and hearing what adults and corporations have to say, I started to understand that people are doing something and people are trying to make it better. It's just taking a very long time to make it happen. The time we are taking is not acceptable, but people are trying, and that I think is a good thing. And from today, I got to know about Arab and from Tony about the actions and the changes of it and what I need to do more in my community too. So thank you for everyone for this amazing session, and thank you to Sarah for supporting.
Thank you, Nomu. I think you have rightly raised the sense of urgency, the sense of importance. I often hear my teenagers talk about this, and I'm sometimes at a complete loss of words. There are some really positive things I can go back with and talk over the dinner table tonight. At some point, I do encourage the audience to also have a listen to I think there's a recent podcast, Tony, on FMNR and just the impact and opportunity that presents, amongst other really important solutions. I am having a look in the chat. I don't want to miss anyone's questions. I want to sum up a little bit before we need to finish. So just last opportunity, do throw any, oh, there is a question here. Sorry, I'd missed that one. Tony, looks like there's a question for you. I can't actually see the full screen.
Tony, how can we position FMNR model with companies as part of, and I missed the bottom line.
Me too. Green economy?
It's actually in the, if you go in the Q&A on the chat, you can see the full question.
How can we position MFMR model with companies as part of green economy?
So I guess there's various ways. One option that companies often are interested in is buying the carbon credits. And in World Vision, we ensure that most of the profit from that goes to the community. And we don't lock them out of benefiting from the forest. So it's sustainable management of the forest with the added benefit of carbon credits. But I would think, particularly for those companies that are they're sourcing their materials from agriculture, it's in their interest to incentivize farmers, perhaps give a premium for those farmers growing foodstuffs and other products in a regenerative way. So that's just two things off the top of my head.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tony. Rahul, do let me know if I've missed any other questions. I think, look, there's clearly been a theme that's come through here, and that is that climate change and climate action is about collective action. I think it's really important. We've talked about a just transition, what that might look like. addressing the needs of highly vulnerable communities, thinking about the impacts of our actions for everyone. And clearly there is much to learn from businesses and organisations in terms of how they are responding. I'm certainly keen to keep walking down this journey from a civil society perspective, really building greater solidarity and multi-stakeholder collaboration. I thank you all, esteemed panel, for being part of this conversation. You've brought such wise insights to the table. And I think it's my job now to pass back to Rahul. I think perhaps we've lost our host, but I'm certainly still here. And perhaps it's best just to thank you all again, wish you all well, and we look forward to continuing these conversations. Thank you, everyone.
Hi, everyone. So sorry, I
Thank you.
just connected to the video. Yeah, sorry. And thank you all for the participants, the moderator, and the panelists for very insightful session. And I just want to show that we have a poll. And the poll is, are you interested to partner with us to mitigate and reverse the impacts of climate change across Asia? Key in your response to the poll that's happening right now. And yeah, I think you can do the poll. And I just to remind you that you need to join our last and fifth session in the volunteerism and head on to the session link in the schedule tab. So see you and thank you.